there we go. Starting out on a special one here. The warehouse episode of Domiciled. Scott's riding out a hurricane in Tampa. So today we're really lucky to have Kevin Lawton from the new warehouse and Aaron Hatfield, that supply chain guy. And we're going to have a really fun bit of banter here over the next 30 minutes. Bit of banter, if you will.
Right.
But yeah, you guys want to go ahead and introduce yourself?
Sure. Aaron, you want to go first? Alphabetical order? Or what?
All right. Well, sure. I'll hop in real quick. My name is Aaron Hatfield. I'm the principal consultant at Hatfield Consulting, head of sales at Arvist AI, and I go by the moniker of that supply chain guy. Happy to be here today. Thanks for inviting me on. Happy to learn more and talk to you more, Kevin.
All right. Well, thanks for having me. I'm Kevin from the New Warehouse podcast. And definitely happy to be joining today especially for the warehouse episode. It's kind of my thing, I guess you could say, right? Say warehouses are sexy over here at the shirt in the back here. So, yeah, definitely excited to join and looking forward to talking to you guys and bantering away here, Paul.
Oh yeah, no, it's really exciting. I'm gonna try this out here. Let's see what this banner looks like. Yeah.
Oh, yeah, I mean, usually I use all caps, but okay, I'll take it.
Yeah, no, I like that. I just wanted to pop that up here. Cool little thing we could do here. But yeah, I think that's kind of a little spillover from your current gig. So a lot of stuff going on recently. I mean, I think we had our really long, short strike. I think everybody's talked about. I know all of my customers talked about. Kevin, I'm sure every conference, actually Kevin and Aaron both, every conference we've been to, everyone was talking about that either coming up or it happening, and then it kind of ended as quick as it started, which still caused problems. I've got people that were like, yeah, I had 4 containers to pick up. Now I've got 50, and I only had the space for the 20, so they all showed up in that time. So it still creates constraints, even though it was short-lived. Are there, I know that's the big news topic people have talked about. Anything recently in the news you guys have picked up and been like, oh, that's really interesting?
Yeah, I got something.
Yeah.
Yeah. Well, I was going to say first, the strike, I mean, I think was super interesting. I will say it's not fully over, right? I mean, it's tentative.
Hey, just till January, right?
January 15th, yeah. And they still got a big sticking point to cover, which is the ban on automation, right? Which I think is super interesting. Like shut down the ports and the flow of goods into the country, out of the country, and also say like, oh, we don't want automation, right? That's a real good way to get people on your side for not having automation, I think. But yeah, I think that's interesting, definitely. But I just saw something like, I don't know, an hour or so ago. I don't know if you guys follow this guy, Britton Ladd, on LinkedIn. He's a pretty good follow. He likes to just like be brutally honest with where CEOs are like failing, basically. But super smart guy. I mean, super insightful. I've like messaged back and forth with him before on a couple of different things. And but he posted something about Amazon and what they're doing with Whole Foods markets, which I think is pretty interesting. Amazon owns Whole Foods, and they really haven't done much with it. And he's been very critical of them over the time since they acquired. And there's like this big statistic that, most of the people that go shop at Whole Foods, they then also go to another store to do the rest of their shopping for like regular brand name stuff at Walmart and things like that, right? So Amazon's like losing that additional revenue potentially, right? So Amazon just announced that they're making some changes and with Whole Foods, and they're going to be like combining Amazon Fresh and Whole Food and all these different things.
Wow.
But from like a warehouse fulfillment perspective, it's the warehouse episode. So they are going to be turning some of these Whole Foods markets into like automated micro fulfillment centers in the back room, essentially, right? So you can go in the store, if I read the article correctly, you can go in the store do your regular Whole Foods, organic, nice, whatever you want to call it stuff. I'm not a Whole Foods guy, so I don't really know. I just bought some mums from them the other day, though, I will say. So,
Nice.
but yeah, they basically you can go do that, and then you can also order at the same time, like your Pepsi, your Cheetos, and all these things, and they'll fulfill that stuff in the back of the store, and you can pick it up like at the end with your order, or you can go and pick up from the store, or it'll be like same day delivery or stuff like that. So they're
Interesting.
finally seems like they're finally kind of tapping into the Whole Foods network and trying to really maximize on that, I think, which I think is like long overdue, right? I mean, Amazon
Right.
could be like a huge grocery player, I think, and they've kind of, for whatever reason, like not really fully pushed on that. And I think that's pretty interesting.
Yeah, I just found the post. I think I shot it into that chat there, and it's really interesting the piece around the argument of like they kind of have their own brands, right?
Mhm.
And then it's like the people still want the other things. I mean, I think about myself at Trader Joe's, right? I go there because it's a lot of it you look at and you're like, this is co-packed, right? Like I know, like this packaging looks far too familiar. Like I'm
Yeah.
sure this is made for you, but like still, and it's one of those things where like I go there because I can get everything that I need
Yeah.
for that week.
Yeah.
And it's like, I'm sure there's good things at Whole Foods, but that's so interesting. It almost feels like they're like capitulating to some of the large CPG brands that are like just so ingrained in everyone that they have to, it's a part of your
Mhm.
week. Diet Coke is like a thing. Everybody, people that love that stuff don't just love it. They like, they're like
They're addicted to it. Yeah.
addicted to it.
Right.
Yeah. So
Oh,
it's
yeah.
like,
Yeah.
there's no Diet Coke there. I don't think so. I wouldn't know. I don't go there a ton. There's one down here in Chicago. I just never make it over there.
Yeah.
No,
Yeah.
like
That's interesting.
first glance, honestly, I mean, yeah, if they're not selling those products, they're missing a sizable share of the market, right? Just from a retail sense, And then if you're able, Amazon's kind of, in my opinion, they're due for a big update or a big kind of change.
Mm.
It's like for a while there last year, it was talking about drones every other day, it seemed like, and their drone delivery launching. And it seems like every other year you hear something about Whole Foods or some type of innovation. And honestly, it sounds like a good idea, I think, because what are you going to do if you can efficiently operate it as a micro fulfillment center on the back end? Well, you just captured a huge percentage of people that, quite honestly, might not have shopped there before.
Yeah.
If they're able to get their everyday products, that's a good way. That's a good kind of hook also for Whole Foods to be like, hey, you can pick up your regular stuff, but check out what we got over here.
Yeah.
Yeah. Yeah. Because I think there is like that. At least I see kind of like there's this perception that Whole Foods, it's all organic, which means it's more
Yeah.
expensive and all these things, right? And if you start to bring people in the door to get their Diet Dr. Pepper there,
That's
then
right.
product placement. Thank you, Dr. Pepper, right, for the sponsorship. So and then bring them in the door, and then they can see like, oh, there are some like other different things here, like I'd like to try, right? And then you hook them on some other products. But I mean, there's a huge percent, I forget what the number was, but that are going in there and then walking out the door and then saying, all right, well, now we're going to stop at Walmart,
Right.
Amazon's competitor, and go get the rest of the stuff we need, right? I need my
Right.
Funyuns or something like that. Right?
Exactly. No, this is smart move in my opinion. I'm going to read more of the article here later, but that's pretty interesting. One thing, and actually this kind of leads into, I'd love to hear more. Nice. There you go. Good disclaimer. Kevin, a lot of these, I'll use this as a segue. So a lot of these micro fulfillment centers that are going to be used in something like that are in your experience. I've been on the last mile delivery side. Paul, you've been around in the warehousing and the last mile. I mean, we've all been around long enough to see these changes. So with these micro fulfillment centers, automation the first thing that comes to my mind is automation. How are you going to make this efficient? How are you going to streamline this? Obviously, you need bodies. You do at some stage. It still is logistics. It still is warehousing. The human element is key. But so I know you're really involved in robotics. I know you're really involved in conversations with people that are making a lot of headway in that space. So in this, and feel free to take this however you want, especially when it comes to a micro fulfillment setup, or for like this Whole Foods example. Let's say there's other examples of micro fulfillment centers. What types of automation are you bullish on that you think could have a positive effect on setups kind of like these from a small but highly efficient standpoint?
Yeah, absolutely. And yeah, how will I take it? In what way? I'm offended, honestly, but no, just kidding.
Oh no,
So,
it just you start talking, and I'm interested to listen.
no. So, yeah, I mean, I think that a lot of companies have tried micro fulfillment, and I think the term micro fulfillment too is like it's a little deceptive in the name, right? Because some people will say micro fulfillment is like sub 10,000 square feet, right? But I think Amazon, apart from the idea of micro fulfillment in the back of like a Whole Foods, like they went to like a micro fulfillment model, like where they're more closer to the customer and stuff, and that was like 150,000 square foot building, right? Which to some 3PLs would be like, whoa, like I'm big time now, right? But like that's micro fulfillment to them. I think the idea of micro fulfillment is more so around the idea of being closer to the customer, right? And that's kind of like the point of it. So there's been a lot of companies that have tried it, attempted it, and not been too successful, right? There's been more success, I think, from a micro fulfillment standpoint, like in Europe, for example, because there's more demand for like that quicker delivery, and we try to do micro fulfillment here, and I think people are kind of like, well, that's not really something I need in like 2 hours, right, or 15 minutes, right? So, and then how do you make the economics work too as well? So I think automation is a key to being successful in micro fulfillment, because you need to be in a smaller facility, definitely, to really get as close to the customer as you want to be to have that type of penetration. And yeah, there's still definitely like human element to it. But I think from like an overall standpoint, like what technology is, and like from a robotic standpoint, it's definitely like an ASRS type of system, right? So like automated storage retrieval system, like an auto store would probably be like the biggest name in that arena. But I think that who's doing something interesting there, and actually they just had like an announcement too. I think I don't know if it was this morning or yesterday, I saw it come through. Is a company called Fabric, and they're originally started as a micro fulfillment 3PL, basically, right? And they've developed their own tech, their own robotics system, which is an ASRS system. And they were doing, I guess, in order to like prove their concept, they were kind of doing it themselves, right? So, as they were like, okay, well, we developed the technology in order to show people this works. Like, we need to go out and get clients and just be a 3PL, and that's what they were doing. And I've seen their micro fulfillment center in Brooklyn, which is pretty interesting. And then they kind of moved away from that, where they were like, well, we're just going to offer our technology to other companies, not just on a micro fulfillment level, but on a bigger level too. It can work that way. But they just announced like they're doing something with Save-A-Lot in Brooklyn, where they're doing like grocery delivery, same day, quick delivery and stuff like that. And so that type of technology is really, I think, what's going to enable that to happen. So like, I know their system, for example, you can pick all your items, right? And there's a small footprint. I think the facility I was in was around 12,000 square feet, something like that. And about 9,000 of it was the system, right? And they were doing high volume out of there with just a few people in there on a daily basis. But from a space perspective, you can pick all the stuff, put it in a tote, and then send the tote back into the system until it's ready to get picked up, right? So you don't have this big staging area. You don't have it like all queued up and piled up on carts or whatever the case may be. Like when the delivery person or truck comes, you pull those orders out of the system again, and they're ready to go. You just throw them in the truck at that point. So I think that's really some of the ones that are kind of making penetration is going to be like those ASRS systems and like shuttle systems where you get really dense storage, and then also high efficiency like throughput coming out. And then one I think that is interesting where a little less like infrastructure investment is a company called Brightpick. And so they have a robot that's basically like I don't have it here. It's in my son's room. I have a Lego of the robot. But my son took it. So it's it's like a little tower thing basically that kind of comes along, and it holds two totes on it. And it'll pull out the tote or put back the tote, and then it has a robotic arm built onto it, and it'll pick the item, put it in the order tote, and then move all along. But from an infrastructure perspective, it can work with just like existing shelving, right? So that's like a pretty not so heavy lift, right? To be able to get something like that into the back room of like a store or something like that. So, but I think you need that kind of dense storage equation there, and then also like some type of automation to increase like the throughput to be able to make that happen, because you have to carry, I mean, to really be effective, I think you got to carry like a good amount of SKUs to have like the order density and volume coming through. And, I think grocery is a great application because there's always demand like for groceries, right? I mean, when you start to get into like, do I need a pair of shoes in, 15 minutes? Hey, maybe certain scenarios. Yeah. But like very rare, right? Like that's not like a reoccurring thing where like, oh, once a week, I'm going to get a pair of shoes every 15 minutes. So I think like there's certain fits there, but I think that automation is like essential to really have success with it.
I'm glad you brought up ASRS's. That's if I don't get tongue tied, but I'm glad you brought that stuff up. I'm going to look up those companies too. A couple of them I'm familiar with. Is it Brightpick, Bright Plus? What it remind me?
Brightpick, yeah.
Brightpick. I have not heard of them. It does. I agree with what you're saying, though. It reminds me, there's a company that I know that I think might fall in the same kind of space as that. It's I got a relationship with the folks over at Reputa Robotics.
Oh,
and
sure.
And honestly, it's, well, in this case, just because I'm most familiar with them, is, they're coming from Japan, right?
Yeah.
Which is already, we were talking earlier about, or you were mentioning, in the EU or over in Europe, where it comes to micro fulfillment or last mile delivery, is you look at the congestion, right? Or like take Reputa, for instance, look at the amount of people that are already, they're densely populated areas, and Reputa is one, but these I'm going to look into them too, because I think there's going to be a lot of external forces that influence automation within the U.S. supply chain in a positive way. But if you look at a lot of these companies, is even if they're U.S. based, at least in my experience so far, is they're bringing a lot of this experience from places like Japan or places like Germany or places like, Denmark, these highly dense locales. I don't know. I'm bullish on automation, robotics. I'm not to the iRobot stage yet, but
Yeah.
this is interesting because I think companies like that, I agree with you, they're going to have a major play in this micro fulfillment, last mile, final mile kind of arena.
Yeah, that's a really good point you bring up. Something I think about a lot is like, living in Chicago. I think we're rated like the worst city to drive a truck in. I don't know who told me that.
Worse than New York, really? Interesting.
Well, I think New York has rules about where tractor trailers are allowed to be.
Yeah,
So like,
yeah.
I think Chicago, like you could
Heavy
be driving
tickets.
down the road and see like, I often see like a full 53-foot going down here. And I mean, it kind of makes sense. Chicago's got really grand, wide streets, right? But it's funny that you guys are talking about, micro fulfillment centers, because I'm looking out of my building and there was a company called Getter.
Oh, yeah.
Yeah.
and they had a spot down there, and I used to walk by it on the way to the gym, and I was like, that's interesting. They've got this, and of course everybody I know GoPuff, right? Like,
Mm.
but it seems like a lot of people entered the space and left the space all in the same, and it's a really tough space to be in, that quick fulfillment, facility
Yeah.
right there, because, a lot of these folks seem like they just bought up like storefronts and blacked out the windows, and they just had, racks in there. And I'd be curious if one of the things that stopped them, or, not Getter, but anybody, right, is I only have so much space. How do I maximize the pick and pack in the space and the organization of that? And I wonder if, kind of what you were just saying about like towers, right? And that I
Mm.
wonder if some of this automation will make it so that the location can make a little bit more sense in a city. Because I think, like, I was always amazed that some of these companies that were in that space, like they owned their own facility,
Mm.
right? Because I feel like
Right.
there's so many 3PLs, and it's like it's an understatement to say like you couldn't count them, but like you run into them all the time where it's like, oh, I've never heard of you. You have how many facilities?
Yeah.
Like, I run into that all the time
Right.
at Conduit, right? You're talking to someone and you're like, you have 35 facilities. They're like, yeah. It's like, you've never heard of us? No. I'm sorry. You can tell me more. Like, tell me more about what you do. And you start to find out that, like, there are all these players in this space. Some of them have been around for 100 years. Some of them have been around for one.
Yeah.
And it's like, I think it's a really interesting space.
Yeah.
Where I could see, I've talked to someone recently, and, they told me, like, yeah, you go to do temperature control, not even reefer, just temperature control in one part of your building to handle stuff that other companies don't want to handle, because they don't want to handle makeup and chocolate and things that'll melt, and they don't want to, dictate the whole warehouse has to be this, because that costs a lot of money. So maybe they outsource that, and it's still fulfilled by that company, but it's at another facility.
Right.
Like Amazon comes to mind, right? And like, you're talking to a small company, a smaller company, right, that you wouldn't see on the front page of something, but they're moving crazy volume doing that and making quite a bit of margin off of a 10,000 square foot space. And
Right.
you're like, wow, that's really cool. And I'm hopeful that a lot of the automation that we're talking about here, not just on the picking side, but a lot of what Kevin, what you and I have talked about, and Aaron, you and I have, well, like at the dock side, right?
Yeah.
Dock locks. I'm really interested in seeing automation around that. Safety. I'd like to see more stuff with safety around the dock, because you've got a moving vehicle that weighs quite a bit and doesn't have to be going very fast to break a leg, right?
Mm.
And it's like, break a leg, hurt somebody, cause a big issue. And I'm really curious about that stuff. I've been on the lookout for companies doing things like that. But that stuff's really, really interesting to me. Have you guys run into anything? There's all this hardware coming out. I'm really curious about the software aspect of it and how software will tie into some of this. And I'm curious at how agnostic some of these things are going to be, because I can imagine a world where it ends up siloed. Well, I bought this system with these robots. Now I got to get it to talk to this ERP.
Mm.
And now I got to get it to talk to this TMS or this doc scheduling tool, or all of these different things that they're going to have to get them to talk to. Be curious to see if we end up in a similar situation where you have, coming out of the last big tech piece of, the 90s, right? Where, you had these integrators and these consultants, and you still do in some places like Salesforce, that come in and it's like, I bought all this stuff. Now what do I do?
I think organically, I don't know. Not only I like systems, right? And not just to be super vague. Like, I read, actually, here's a book you should read. It's written by a guy that's 100 times smarter than me, but it's called In a Flight of Starlings: The Wonders of Complex Systems. And what it is, starlings, they're a bird. It goes down, and I'm not going to quote this because I had to read it twice because I'm, but
hey, you and me both, brother.
But it's what's interesting is if you look at, I think, yes, the answer is to your question is yes. I think at some point we are going to hit whether it's automation software, you always see hardware either lead first and then software follow. And sometimes you'll see software lead, but 99% of the time, a lot of what you're able to do with the software is dependent on the ability of the hardware, right? So I think there's going to naturally be an injunction point. And quite frankly, that's where people need to, I think, whether you're a 3PL, whether you're a brand itself, is take 1,000-foot view and look at the entire supply chain as a system. It is one complex. It's more or less, think of a caterpillar, right? Inching across. You've got the truckers on this end. You've got the warehouse and the brands, on the other end. And what one does inevitably affects the truck driver, or inevitably affects the warehouse operator, or the manufacturer, et cetera. And I think that's, as we move forward, is like the integrators are going to become more and more valuable. I've got some good relationships with the folks over at FIQ. There's a great example of what they do well. With what I do as with Arvist, in those capacities, is it's only further, and I'm not even in the robotics portion of it, or but is the importance of efficient integrators and or systems that are complementary and easily able to go back and forth are going to be successful long term. And then I think they're just going to keep getting market share. And we see it. I mean, 2020 or COVID, 2020 and COVID, that was just a natural kind of jolt, right?
Yeah.
Is a lot of that technology from a hardware perspective existed. It was capable to do these things. Nobody had taken that leap, where I think we're going to hit that point here probably, in my opinion, in the next 2 to 3 years. There's a window. And then you're going to see it do the slinky effect happen, and then you're going to see the whole industry, and it's going to be forward progress every single step of the way. But it's going to be okay. A lot of people, like when it comes to AI in the warehouse, right? I know I've talked to both of you about that. As I tell people all the time, is you have to peel the layers back and really focus on the practicality of whether it's an ASRS type setup, whether it's a WMS ERP, whether it's doc scheduling. You got to, the warehouse is just one micro supply chain, because if it can't go from dock door to dock door on the other side efficiently, there's going to be problems on both ends, Yeah. And so I think it's like, I don't mean that to be pessimistic. I just think that's kind of the reality of it. You know what I mean? And then you're going to have, once we get to that silo, once you hit that roadblock or that friction, so to speak, is when, what's going to happen. I think there's going to be a lot of M&A. I think there's going to be, at the same time, I think there's going to be a lot of chapter 33, right? And in those instances, you have to have enough friction to keep that innovation going forward. And right now, I think the software momentum is there, but the hardware momentum is where I've sat in on a couple of your talks, Kevin, with a couple of the, humanoid robotics and so forth, is that clearly these people are absolute pros at what they're doing. They know how to accomplish the goal. They're just literally handicapped in some instances by just physical capabilities of being able to produce what they're looking for.
Yeah. I mean, I think, I agree with you on some of the limitations on the hardware there. I mean, I think, if you think about, and I think, traditionally one of the toughest things to automate and bring robotics to in the warehouse space is kind of that manual manipulation of like a unit piece, right? Which are like hand, right, can do like easily, right? But when we try to repeat like that motion and that gripping, trying to get in the camera here, and like that, this motion itself, like to us is nothing, right? But try and replicate that and have the same like range of motion with your arm and everything has been very difficult to do from a robotic standpoint. And that's from a humanoid standpoint, or a robotic arm for piece picking and stuff like that has been definitely like a challenge, right? The claw. Yes.
That's
claw, right. Yeah. And, so on that side. And then, but I think from a software perspective, I mean, we're already, I think, starting to see some of that stuff, right? Like you mentioned integrators in there.
Right.
So I mentioned like AutoStore earlier, for example. I mean, the AutoStore, there's many different integrators that will do auto store projects, right? But some of the differentiators for the integrators are like the software that they've built to like tack onto the auto store project, right? And that's kind of like, it's like, well, I go to integrator A and they're going to do auto store, and I go to integrator B, they're going to do auto store. Like, who's just going to give me a cheaper install, right? But the competitive advantage really is like the software that they're putting together to make, it do something more, right, than just the stock auto store, I guess, whatever you want to call it. And I think you're seeing a lot of the same form factor and like type of robotic solution.
Yeah.
I think there was like a post on LinkedIn the other day from this guy, Alfredo Pastella. He's in Italy, but he's like AGV AMR guy, and he posted like it was like 4 different companies, like, and all of their solutions looked exactly the same. And his question was like, he was like, oh, like what company is like supplying all of these people? What Chinese company is supplying this company, right? And there were several comments like, oh, this is from this company, right? And it's very clearly like just white labeled, right? That it's like product, right, in a sense. And even like and I think the difference comes down to like the software behind it and what's it doing and its capabilities for that form factor. It's almost like if you think back, I think back, I mean, it's still going on, but like, like a Zebra handheld scanner, right? In a thing, right? I mean, it's, several people using the same hardware, but like, what are they doing with the software that's on it, right? What makes it different, in that sense? And I think we're seeing that. I mean, even you mentioned Reputa, right? Robotics, and shout out to Misbah, I say over there, head of partnerships, right? And but like Reputa, like their follow along robot, like there's the argument that like, oh, well, it's very similar to LocustBot. And then LG now has like one that looks very similar as well, right? But what's the difference is like, how does it navigate? How does it, think about its pick pattern, and it's the software behind it, right? So I think, yeah, definitely like that software is going to be differentiator. But then for people that can unlock like the hardware aspects that have been traditionally challenging too, then they're going to see some success on that side, I think, as well.
Yeah, it's funny you say that. It reminds me of something. I recently read some. I think it goes around. It's like copy pasta on the internet. But like, you guys aware of how many times something's evolved into a crab? Are you guys familiar with this concept?
No, I mean, I've never evolved into a crab.
So apparently, like, yeah, that's a fair point, Kevin. This is a fair point.
Waiting for my turn.
Yeah, right. But apparently, every time a crustacean, like over time, forms, it slowly all goes into this funnel where they become a crab. There's a lot of biologists that believe like,
interesting,
that is the most efficient form of crustacean, is those arms and those legs. And you were just saying, hey, everybody's got the same thing. And something that I think is kind of similar is like, well, yeah, if that's the most, if those robots, if that's the most efficient form that we have at this moment, everything's going to kind of evolve in that route. And then what changes if you kind of copy the, the same concept right along the same lines as evolution, you're like, oh, wait, well, ones in, these crabs in warm water versus cold water may look different. Deeper, they may have longer arms, this and that. It may just be that we end up with very similar things, and then it becomes a game of who can fill the niche quicker. So I have one that's, it's just like everyone else. Oh, mine's really good for food because it's taking the temp, it's somehow measuring temperature. I'm just shooting out there. I don't even know how they do that. But like, or this one's going through and it's running it under a robotic eye that's actually scanning everything on top of it, and it's integrated in to know how that works, etc. Things like that. Or maybe, one or two of them are actually more heavy duty. I think like fork trucks, same thing, right? Like you have the original, and then it's like, I have customers that have them where they're like, this thing can pick up an entire container, right? And it's like all the way down to like, oh, I can pick up one pallet, single, just one pallet, standard pallet, right? And so I think it's the interesting thing is whether you're talking about the software or the hardware. I think everyone tends to go towards what's most efficient. I think everyone kind of arrives at the same thing. I'd even,
Yep.
there's just so many things. An axe, a hammer. Like we all settled on the idea of what a hammer looks like, and there's just maybe a couple variations, but there's
I'm still questioning that one actually.
that's a good point. We should dig into that philosophically. But no, I mean, there's hammers for drywall and there's hammers for other things, and the only difference is one's
Right.
got like a drywall axe on the back of it. And I think all of those examples is just saying to kind of reinforce that. I think everyone is going to look the same eventually. I think all the software is going to look really similar. I think all the hardware is going to look really similar, and then we'll have, Aaron, to your point, those inchworm moments. I think the inch forward is slow. I think the catch up is very fast. And I think
Agreed.
that's where everything starts to look the same, at least where I see like competitive,
Mhm.
even with the folks that I compete with. And Aaron, I'm sure you as well over at Arvist. I mean, and Kevin, you kind of sitting as like the coolest job in this industry where you just kind of get to sit and you don't
Yeah,
have
I just
super a
see
ton of,
everything. Yeah.
you don't have a ton of skin in the game of either which way it goes. You're just along for the ride in a lot of ways, which I'm jealous of. Because you just get to go, oh, look, that's cool. But, I would say like, that's kind of my feeling, right? Like, I almost think the standardization like that will be good. And to even tie it back to micro fulfillment centers, I could see one type of robotics line being
Mm.
really good for that, as opposed
Sure.
to, that's not going to work in a, 1.2 million square foot facility with a 200,000 square foot mezzanine, right? Like that might be a totally different world, like those
Right.
applications. And I mean, it's just really exciting to see it, but it's really cool the similarities of
Mhm.
other things in the world of kind of like, who would have thought
Oh,
we'd talk about like evolution and robots, right? But um, it is neat like that. I mean,
right.
it's really cool. I mean, I'm curious to say this. I mean, we've been chatting for a while, and I think this has been a really good conversation so far. I think we've got a little bit, quite a bit more to go. But out of curiosity, where do you think or is there anything out there that you think is missing the mark? So, like for
Mm.
example, I look at stuff sometimes, and I'm like, are you sure you're selling that to a warehouse person? Like, are you really
Yeah.
on target with what that is? And like, when I talk to warehouse leadership, they care about one thing: is it easy?
Yeah.
Mhm.
And the more temp workers they have, the more they care about that. And even if they don't have temp workers, you know, the second thing becomes, can I take my person that's got all the tribal knowledge, knows everything, where all the bodies are buried in this facility, and has their own way of doing things and work around, and can I find a place in between what their mode of operation is, which is tuned based off what they're familiar with, and this new process? And is there an in between where they're not going to go around it? Because even with robotics, I have this deep feeling, and I haven't heard anything to corroborate this, but the same thing in software where there's one guy who doesn't want to do it and keeps it all on a spreadsheet on the side, right?
Yeah.
Um, is the same thing going to happen with robotics where it's like, oh, well, I don't turn that robot on because I picked this because it doesn't do it the way I want it? Well, how do you
Mm.
pass that up to make it do the thing you want it, right?
Mm.
Stuff like that. Is there anything you've seen that's missed? Or directions that are missed? And obviously, let's not throw anybody under the bus. I think there's
Yeah.
room for everybody here.
No, I mean, I think I agree with you. I think there's a challenge there, and I've certainly seen this, a few times, and like just talking to people and people reaching out, what do you think about this idea or this thing we're trying to do? And we've seen like a lot of tech come into the industry, right? And some of the I think challenges there potentially are that people have this idea, right? And I would say, like, personally, I think this is one of the coolest things about the warehousing industry is that all these like tech solutions that are being developed. I mean, we see a lot of stuff like being developed through DARPA, right? Like that program, and
Yeah.
then it's for defense, but then ultimately, like, they find a home in the logistics arena, right?
Yeah.
In the warehouse. So it's kind of like these like big, tech solutions and things, like where do they find like practical applications, like in the warehouse, right? So
Mm.
we get to see some of this stuff like really happening. But on that same regard, like some of these tech people don't have like the operations background, right? Or the
Mm.
operations understanding. So Paul, like to your point, it's like, oh, well, this will work like this because X, Y, and Z, and A plus B equals D, or whatever the case may be, right? But operations is not necessarily like that black and white all the time, right? There's
No,
a lot of
it's
variability
not.
there. And so, I've seen where yeah, like, oh, we got this great idea, whether it's a, hardware solution from robotics automation side or just like a system solution too, where they're like, oh yeah, well, this will solve like this problem and this problem has to, right? And then they kind of try to bring it to market, and then they have to like pivot a little bit because, to your point, they get in front of like an ops person, and ops person's like, oh, that's not really a problem for me, or like that's not
Yeah.
a priority for me, or like, no, I'm good, like it's too different, right? And
Yeah.
there's challenges there to kind of overcome that. So I think, like, if anybody's out there is listening, right, I mean, uh and is trying to start some kind of tech solution or something for the industry, like, I think, either you need to find somebody, I don't know, maybe like me or Aaron, to be a consultant for you and advise you a little bit, but or like you got to find either a co-founder or somebody pretty early on that has lived in that world, right?
Yeah.
And I think there's enough people that have lived in that world that are interested in making improvements and would almost come to the other side of the table, in a sense, like going from being in the ops to being like with the solution provider. But yeah, I think like that needs to be tackled early on, because then you waste a lot of time like developing, thinking like you got the great solution, and then you get in front of a warehouse manager, and warehouse manager just like chews it up and spits it out, basically, right?
Yeah.
So yeah, that's kind of my thoughts there.
That's a really good point. I think it's something, I mean, obviously we all know each other. I mean, over at Conduit, right? One of the things I think, really big thing for us has been, and I think you kind of hit on this. It's like you don't make assumptions and go in. You go there to get the assumption of someone who does it with more data points than you, and then you go, okay, that's the problem. Here's how they solve it now. How do you make that easier? Right? It's kind of the opposite way, where you'd think like, oh, here's a problem on a test, right? Like the way all of us were, learned through standardized testing. Oh, there's this test, a question on this test, and it's going to be XYZ, and I have to answer XYZ perfectly. So let me go ahead and pre-plan. But I think your point is with operations, I think a lot of people in our space say this, oh, no two warehouses are the same. But I go further and say, like, no two warehouses in the same organization are the same. And in some cases, no two sides of the warehouse are the same. Like I've seen shipping act completely different than receiving on a scale that was like, I didn't even think I was at the same company from their order of operations. And sometimes that's leadership, but sometimes that's just the nature of the beast of what they're putting out. And like, you're in the medical space. If someone's doing, I get full truckloads in and then I send milk runs out, they go to hospitals to prep for surgeries, right? And we do, I'm thinking about the Cardinals and the Medlines of the world. And then on the other side, you think about MFCs, like what we're talking about, and it's like, yeah, I pick all this up and some guy in an Uber or Lyft or on a scooter or whatever comes and grabs this and leaves, right? And like, there's so much different order of operations that happen. I think it really takes, you definitely can't walk in here and act like you know anything, because exactly what you said, a warehouse manager is going to go, oh yeah, I've been doing this 20 years. You show me something new, I'll give you $100. And you could sit there for a week guessing and you'd never show them anything new, whether it's from incidents or where things can go wrong. And, I think ops people are really the king of the edge case. Kings and queens of the edge case, because they know the edge cases. They've seen them. They got woke up at 3 a.m. because of it. You know what I mean? And had to go in and they did what with a fork truck? How did it get up there? It flipped how? It somersaulted. How did that happen? And that's happened somewhere, right? And it's I think it's a really interesting piece that you brought up of like, no assumptions when you're going to build something. Like go out and figure out how people are doing it. And I think in the, it's something we're learning here. And I think that a lot of our peers, I mean, Aaron, we've had this conversation, Kevin, I think we have too, other folks that are either selling it or designing it, is like the customer is becoming so much more important from a design standpoint. And, but at the same time, you got to be careful not just to go, oh, the customer wants to do X, so we're going to do X. It's like, well, what's this potential customer trying to do? And then how do I make it there, instead of just going, oh, yep, click, done, send, right?
I think you hit the nail on the head. Is like, you look at these. So I didn't start on the tech side. I didn't start on the artificial intelligence side of the supply chain. I started on the cold storage warehouse in HR of all places. So I learned about all of the problems. But what I learned real quickly, especially when it comes, and I've said the same thing when it comes to, I grew up, a lot of my buddies growing up, they're all tradies now, or they're involved in some type of, whether it's truck driving, warehousing, etc. And they'll peg a poser from a mile away.
Yeah.
And that's the one thing is I think there's a ton of opportunity, and it needs to be, I think there's going to be a lot of uniformity long term. I do also think that things economically, organically monopolize, and that over time has to be rebroken and redistributed, right? Or at least I'm a capitalist, but pure unregulated capitalism is why we had the robber barons, and so is stay competitive. But this is an opportunity, find a need, fill a need. And how do you bridge that gap with technical folks? As I think, there's all this knowledge, there's all this really, truly innovating stuff, but you have to always go back to, is this practical? Is it digestible? And is it beneficial? Like, are you actually, is it not, is it the coolest? Not if it's the flashiest. You might have the coolest thing in the world, but if it doesn't provide any practical ROI to the organization or the small team that you're trying to do, then great, you created an awesome desk ornament, or like an awesome paperweight type concept. And I think that's really where, well, for instance, I'm in artificial intelligence through Arvist. As I run across a lot of people, oftentimes as I'm educating people in these conversations, I hate pitch slapping. I tell people, I hate dirty salesmen. Don't be a schmuck. Like, it's not that hard, But as when you're talking with these people is, one, I think the tech folks within our industry, warehousemen, warehouse operators, 3PLs, the people that aren't sitting behind the computer screen, they're the doers. They're always going to have to be a part of the process, regardless of how automated it becomes. There will have to be a human element. They are, like you said, they are on boots on the ground. They understand the issues. They understand the problems. And, that's a, shout out to Arvis and a couple of the other folks that, I work with, and a lot of the, folks I would consider you in this boat, both of you, is talking, having those conversations, educating each other, and then finding out how to drive value. And not just drive value, everybody wants to make a buck, and I'm all down for that. But how do you actually make, like, and this is funny, if you've ever seen Silicon Valley on HBO, they're it's a spoof on every startup. They're like, we're making lives better, and that's what every startup says. But is when it comes to warehousing, is we're at this juncture in time. How do you realistically, we had to go through the Industrial Revolution, right? We went through the late, most of our lives, we saw the development of the World Wide Net. We had Y2K, we had all these things. And now we're just in that next iteration of how do you make this technology even that much more practical? Part of what I love it too is warehousing, logistics is not the flashiest industry.
Yeah.
Right. We're not sending rockets to the moon. We're not,
and it hasn't changed that much. I'm curious all the time, how much has it changed since, like, I don't know, ancient Greece? Like, is it really that different? There's a guy taking a log. I'm sure there's tech, but like, there's something comes in. There's a guy taking a log. There's a piece of paper, right? Yeah. They've got writing it down. They're putting it on there. They're marking where it is in the thing, and then someone else on the other side is going, "Yeah, I'm here for X amount of units of olive oil." And the guy goes, "Cool. Your name's this. Cool. Here's your this. Right. Goodbye." And that's like the old BOL, right? Like, and how much has that changed? A lot with technology, but the core principle is still there. Kevin, I kind of want to tag you in on some things here, because I know Aaron and I can go. When you
sure,
when you look at some of those things we were saying, like, warehouse operators, folks that have been in the space, they can spot a phony from a mile away, right?
Yeah.
How quickly do you think you can look at somebody who you have no idea?
Ooh, good question.
Oh yeah,
you're talking about?
Yeah.
Is it instant?
Yeah, I was gonna say, like, when Aaron said that, I mean, because I've been a plant manager, inventory control manager, ops manager, and like all the time you get people, knocking on the door like, "Oh, we sell cardboard, right? We sell this," or and you can tell right away, like, they know their stuff or they don't. I mean, it's like, you talk about the tech providers coming in, like, one of the things I think is like they need to know how to speak the language in a sense, right? I mean, they need to know what they're talking about. And, even to that sense, like, we used to kind of mess with some of these,
No.
young kids that, would come in
Go
and,
on.
sales reps and stuff. Like, there was a guy one time came in and wanted to like, the most like specific thing, wanted to like sell bathroom floor cleaning, right? And I'm like, this is like, and I was assistant plant manager at that time, like running distribution, manufacturing, the whole building basically. And I'm like, this is the last thing on my mind, right? Like
Priority number 55.
yeah. And he comes in, and it's this guy, and he's like all jacked, and he's got like his tight shirt, and he's wearing like these
Stole my shirt.
like velvet loafers with no socks, and like the pants above the ankles and all this stuff. And I'm like, it doesn't even look like he's coming to a warehouse, right? It looks like he's about to like just jump into the club or something. And I'm like, yeah. And I'm just like, this guy, and I just happened to be in the office, and my facilities manager, who would have been the guy to like make a decision anyway, even though I would have told him, no, we're not doing that. It was like there with me, and we kind of looked at each other like, who the hell is this guy? Like, what is it? What do you think he's doing, right? And so he's telling us, yeah, we got this great, cleaner, and we'll come in and clean the bathroom floors for you, real nice, like gets in the grout and all this stuff, right? And I'm like, okay, like, but we have somebody on staff that does all cleaning and all that stuff, right? And he's like, well, let me try it. Like, I'll come back next week, and we'll give you a free cleaning in the bathroom, right? So I'm like, okay, yeah, let's do that, sure. And knowing, I'm not buying anything, like I'm not, agreeing anything, but I'm like, sure, I'll have you like deep clean my bathroom floor like for free, for once. And the kid came back, right? Which I give him credit for that, right? Follow up, but yeah, he came back, same, type of outfit, everything, like
Not the same thing though.
No, not the same exact thing.
That would
but
be
like
wild.
Same thing, loafers, no socks, like not dressed to be in a warehouse, right? And and he comes in, and I'm like, oh, so you're gonna clean the bathroom floor? He's like, yeah. And I'm looking, I'm like, well, where's like the scrubber and stuff? Like, you got somebody else with you? Or he's like, no, I'm just gonna show you how the chemical works, and I'll do it, right? And so I got the facilities manager with me, and I'm like, all right, let's see this, right? And the guy's like, he's in there, goes in the bathroom, like under the urinal. It's himself, right? Dressed in, these like, nice clothes and stuff. And he gets down, and he's like scrubbing away, and just like by hand. And I'm like, this is what you're going to do for me every week? Like, I don't know. It was just crazy. And he just still was going. I'm like, this guy has no idea, like, that we're not going for this. We're not going to do this. Right. And that was it. And like, it was not impressive at all. The cleaning, I will say.
What about his biceps? Were they impressive? Were you like, oh man, that guy's jacked? I'm like, I'm not buying it from you, but like, what's your meal plan like?
Yeah. Tell me about your macros. Yeah. So that was one thing, and then all the time too, like, people, they would ask for meetings, either stop by or send like these cold emails, mostly transportation companies actually, and we had like long-standing contracts, and it wasn't even my decision. It was, the transportation team, but they'd send me an email like, can we stop by, see the facility? And transportation team wasn't on site, but I would say, yeah, you can stop by the facility, but my shipping team, they love donuts, right? So we got tons of free donuts that way, right?
Smart.
Kevin, you dog.
And if they show up, no donuts, I'd be like, no donuts? Like, I'm like, the guy from XY shipping company, just brought donuts on Tuesday, like, and t-shirts, right? So, what's
you were running a racket, Kevin. Like, had people decked out? You're like getting free backpacks and swag and.
Yeah, I mean, they were very much like disrupting the flow of operations. Like, they just show up unannounced and stuff, and I'd be like, all right, like, I don't have time, like, send an email to this person or something, right? And they'd be like, no, like, it just take 10 minutes, this and that, and I'm, like, by that time, I'm already kind of like, hey man, like, I'm gonna move to something else, right? I got something going on here, like, don't show up here unannounced. Like, let's make sure we're here, and then we just put a sign up on the door. Eventually, it's like, and I just point to the number, now call this number, because like most of the people showing up, like it wasn't even like our decision or our department.
Right.
Like it had to go to transportation, or had to go to procurement, or something like that. And
Did
like,
you tell them that on the phone? Like, hey, no, I don't do that, or were you just like, nah, I want these donuts? Like, be honest. I
oh
think you
yeah, if
wanted
they
the
sent
donuts.
if they like sent an email or something, my phone number was not out there, so luckily I didn't get like solicited that much
Nice.
on calls from the work number. But yeah, like emails and stuff, they would come through, and yeah, I wouldn't say anything. I'd just be like, oh yeah, you can come by, and bring
Bring some left
donuts.
donuts. Yeah. Might
Yeah, bring donuts, bring bagels, yeah,
Yeah.
whatever.
You're
Yeah,
keeping
so
the morale up in a really great way without, I think that's like a resume line, like increase morale by X while spending $0.
yeah.
I think that's like I could see that. That's a,
That's one of those
Yeah.
one of those endorsed skills on LinkedIn. Actually,
yeah.
you know.
Kevin, I might add that
Yeah.
to yours just because for
Donut
funsies.
booster, yeah, or something
Yeah.
like that. Yeah,
Yeah.
donut
Increase
cure.
donut consumption by X while spending X.
Yeah, that's a good metric actually. I should have
That's
had
it.
that on
Yeah.
my yearly review there. I should
Yeah,
have
there you
put
go.
that.
Your
Yeah,
30, 60, 90, or your
yeah, yeah,
360. Yeah, there you go.
yeah.
Yeah. Hey, tell me about this donut thing in your self review. Oh yeah, so
Yeah,
no,
yeah.
that's funny. You know what? It's funny too. There's another point you brought up of like not knowing how to navigate the warehouse. I mean, Aaron and I, we
Mm.
both call into warehouses and operations folks, and I think the biggest one is like, usually you call someone and go, "Hey, who handles that?" It's probably not you, and that's
Yeah.
okay. But who handles it? I just want to know who to call. I'm not trying to waste your time. And like 9 times out of 10, they're like, "Oh my god, yeah, it's this guy. Don't get out of my way," right? And then
Yeah.
that 10% they're like, we don't give that information out. And I'm like, okay, cool. And
Yeah,
you move
yeah.
on to the next one, right? But 90% of the time they're like, oh, you're not going to bother me? Yeah, no, it's this guy. Yeah, get out of my way.
Right.
Yeah.
Um,
I wouldn't I wouldn't blow up people's spot like that. I would say like, oh, this is the main office number. Call this number, and you obviously want to talk transportation, so ask for transportation, right? And that would be
makes
it,
me
right?
wonder why didn't they do that the first time and not spend all that money on donuts?
Yeah.
Just
Because
a little bit of legwork.
yeah, because it was funny because I guess we would show up as like the location for the company, but
Oh
like
no.
everybody that wasn't like operations didn't sit there, right? They were all in like a different office somewhere else. So that was the thing. Like everybody would show up there, and that's why we put a sign up eventually. And like, I cracked the door open in the office and be like, oh, like who are you here to see? And oh, we just want to talk to somebody about this. And I'm like, oh, call a number. Like that's it, right?
Yeah, slap.
So yeah,
See you, bye.
yeah,
I imagine you're cracking the door and everything's on fire behind you. And you're just
yeah,
like, hey, what do you want? And there's like someone falling off of like the scaffolding, the rack system, and you're just like, yeah, what's up? No, call
yeah,
that number. And as you
yeah.
close it, someone's screaming. Like,
Yeah. That was your fault. You see that? That was your
you
fault.
see, look what you
You
did.
distracted me for 1
Yeah,
second. Yeah.
yeah. But no, I mean, it's so funny too because it's actually my favorite thing about this industry is you call into someone and like every once in a while you get that guy. And Kevin, I know you've worked with someone like this, and Aaron, you too, in your time on the ops side, is call somebody and they're like, yeah, what's up? I'm not doing anything. And then you just
Yeah.
start getting some guy's life story, and I just know he's got his feet up. He's got a honey bun out of the
Yeah,
out of
big
the vending
Texas.
machine. Yeah, the
Big
big Texas
yeah.
out of the vending machine.
That's
He's
the
like,
one.
yeah,
Yeah.
go on. Yeah, for us, no, probably not. What are you doing today? And I'm like, what? And you all know who I'm talking. There's always
Oh, yeah.
someone that's like, it's usually like I mean, I would say it's like depending on the company, like there's like a shipping guy who's there and everyone else does something and he's just the guy that sits at the desk and he's like, yeah, what's up? Nah. And
Yeah.
then he's like, hold on 1 second. And he covers the thing and you can hear him screaming muffled at someone. And then he comes like, hey, yeah, how you doing? Yeah. That's my favorite part about this industry is there's so many people that are so interesting and have so many cool life stories. It's just very fun. I do have a question though, guys, and I'm gonna put it on the screen here because I want to call back to this.
Oh. Robots or crabs?
Yeah, it's pretty important.
Yes. No.
You think?
Yeah.
No.
Maybe.
I'm gonna say yes. I'm gonna say yes.
Yeah, they're crabs.
I mean, I've seen like like some that look like crabs, kind of, right?
See, there you go. We're getting there.
Right?
We're getting.
But there is one that's Bionic Hive. Have you seen that one? That's one's
The
a little
Bionic
wild.
Hive.
Yeah, they call it the Squid, actually.
Is it called Bionic Hive?
Yeah, it's the name of the company.
Oh, I see it. Oh, that's scary. I don't like that. That freaks me out.
It like climbs up the shelves, basically.
I can see that. I almost wish I
I
could.
want, I want
could
that in my garage. Like I want to
Yeah.
have that. Like this is
You
the
can't.
kind
You
of
can't
stuff
look at
that-
me and tell me that didn't come out of DARPA. There's something else that's made, and then they gave that to someone and was like, you can use this technology. That thing's doing something crazy in another country right now.
Yeah. But that one's pretty wild. Yeah.
See, it's stuff like this. It's just like we're such at the early stages, and that's like, talking about these sales guys. It's like go on site, actually talk. Like I always think of apprenticeship programs, right? Is go on site, actually talk with these people, hot seat with whoever you're trying to sell to, or it's like at these trade shows, like where we run into each other. You see stuff like this. The only way that you're getting, and I'm thinking of a sales mind, right? Because I've always been in sales and operations of some shape or form. And we were just talking about sales guys. Is if somebody's actually doing their homework, and if somebody's actually trying to quote refine the craft, so to speak, right, and not be a schmuck, is they're going to learn the background of the industry, right? They're going to pay attention to the subtle nuances, the clothes that you wear. I remember it's funny because you mentioned that. I remember one time working I was always in boots and jeans, and then I remember the guys come in with their wingtips, and I'm like, hey man, those are awesome looking shoes, but we're not talking the same language, and
also get off the floor. Those aren't slip resistant.
We give them the steel toe covers they'd have to wear and clank around the warehouse.
Nice. But it's these sellers from this point is not only just from a physical, like on the ground vibe, but they're going to have to know, like, sellers and companies or solution providers, software providers that are coming up with this type of hardware, these types of software, stuff that we all work with. They're going to have to communicate at a completely and entirely deeper level than I think traditionally our industry. Especially, I've been a broker, I've been on that side of things, I've been in the warehouse, I've been in software sales, I've done partnerships. There's this whole, when we were coming up in the industry, it was pound the phones, do this, and it was the same shtick, different day. I think now what we're seeing is that's intricate. You're talking about making things simple, practical, applicable, earlier in the conversation. Is at first glance, you're like, whoa. But if you peel back the layers a little bit, whether it's robotics, whether it's AI, whether it's a cleaning product in a warehouse bathroom, it's fundamentally, sales is just going to have to change. And technical sales is going to have to change. You're going to have to find those bridge, and it's going to be industry specific to the supply chain too, right? So you look at different industries. Yeah, you can apply that to each specific industry, but warehousing, logistics in general is just more of a physically demanding, time-consuming, process-based job. Whether in salesmen, saleswomen, sales folks, they need to start understanding that you got to peel back these, and you're always going to have transactional business in the warehousing space. That's just always going to be. It just is, and it's not good or bad. It is. But is that long-term business, these long-term, buyers of, Bionic Hive, of Conduit, Arvist, whatever it might be, is
Kevin's Consulting Services.
Kevin's Consulting. But for real though, actually, no, shameless plug. I'm glad you said that, because honestly, they're going to have to reach out to professionals or experts in the field to be able to learn,
Absolutely.
and because, or else what's coming up, the Broker Carrier Summit, Robert Bain, that whole, all of them, I've been following. That's coming up. Is what are they doing? What do I really love about it is they're bringing two people that have historically never jived together in the same place, right?
Yeah.
And sellers are going to have to explore that more and more as we start developing this stuff in the warehousing space, because it's a very physical process that is now meeting a very automated kind of, and you got to find the nuances, you got to find the gaps. And because at the end of the day too, it's ROI, it's unit economics. You've got to be able to deliver, and if you can't deliver, hey, business is business.
Yeah.
Yeah,
It's a
absolutely.
really good point. I mean, I think, I'll kind of end on this, and then I think we can kind of do our shameless plugs and anything we're doing, and maybe any last things out here. Which great time chatting with all of you. But Aaron, I think the thing you're saying is, it's kind of full circle. I think, there was a time where it was around the phones, and then I think it becomes door to door, and then I think it becomes, stuff is cyclical in general.
Mhm.
What's the Mark Twain? Nothing repeats. It doesn't repeat itself, but it rhymes, right?
Yeah,
History.
I know what you're saying. Yeah,
Yeah, I
I know
think
what
it's,
you're talking
I
about.
think now it's a lot more people buy from people they trust. And with all the AI, I don't know who's who when I'm sending
Yeah.
out messages.
Right.
You can be personalized, but can you be a real person that's curious? That's what puts
Bingo.
people ahead. I just wanted to say that because I think that, that's something we've talked about that's really important. But, for everybody at home that was listening, first of all, Kevin, Aaron, thank you so much for taking the time. Wishing Scott well as he
Yes.
stands on his roof with a
Mhm.
American flag, I imagine, listening to Taylor Swift and fights out the storm.
That's right.
But any plugs anywhere people can catch you guys coming up here? Any conferences? Any shows?
You first, Kevin.
Sure. Well, speaking of the hurricane, supposed to be in Marco Island next week at MHI annual conference down there in Southwest Florida. So we'll see if that happens. Yeah, definitely. Watching that closely. Yeah, I mean that's the next one, and then as far as conferences go, I think after that, the next one for me will be actually Manifest next year
Nice.
in February. So we'll be there. We'll have a booth doing podcast on the floor if people are there and want to check us out. And then we'll also be live streaming that to LinkedIn too for people
Oh,
that
sweet.
can't make it and want to get a little taste of the conference as well. Yeah, and then of course, always you can find the New Warehouse podcast on all podcast platforms and at thenewwarehouse.com as well. So yeah, check it out. Connect with me. Actually, something newer we're doing
There we go.
in partnership collaboration with Nathan Cheney, Supply Cheney, right?
Yeah.
Is Warehousing After Dark,
Ah.
which is a virtual happy hour setting. We had the first one last month in September. Definitely a success. Very good. And we'll have the second one planned already coming up October 30th. Costume optional, I'll say, for Halloween there. And that is at nighttime. So it starts at 8 p.m. Eastern. It's totally virtual, so people can check it out. And I guess I'll share the link with Paul, and you can put it wherever I guess you guys put stuff. I'm not sure.
Yeah, no, we'll definitely give you
Yeah,
a bump there. It's super
yeah,
exciting.
yeah.
I think
Definitely
I
check
missed
that
it
out.
last time, but I think Conrad was able to pop in.
Conrad was there. Yes. Yeah. Yeah. So definitely very cool. Love bringing people in the industry together and getting them to connect and be able to talk shop. And we really had a nice time there. We had about around like 40 people show up. So that was
Yeah.
good. So hoping continue to grow from there.
Awesome. Well, I mean, we always ended on one thing, which is anybody that's curious about warehousing or anything that you're doing. Typically, we focus on drivers and their experiences, right? But with this special episode, I mean, encourage people to go check out other aspects of the logistics space. One, anything you'd say to people getting in, and maybe two sentences or less, getting into this space, maybe coming out of college. And two, where would they look to find information about it aside from the new warehouse?
Mm.
Uh,
The New Warehouse is the single source of info for warehousing. No, yeah, I mean, I think check out podcast. Mine is a good one certainly for warehousing, but there's lots of other ones too involving supply chain and all around there. It's a great place to learn. I would say get active on LinkedIn and get in the networks there and figure that out. And yeah, just have an open mind, I would say, because coming out of college, maybe a supply chain degree, logistics degree, you might start out at a lower level than maybe you're expecting to do, but having that experience at a lower level can really help you as you grow to like a higher level in your career and get a better understanding of really like everything that's going on and how you're going to make some real impact.
Yeah, I think that's good. Aaron, what about you? Thanks, Kevin, for all that.
Sure.
Yeah. Myself, you can find me on LinkedIn, Aaron Hatfield. Twitter, I'm that supply chain guy. I will vouch for that virtual meetup. I was also in attendance. Definitely worth your time going to that if you're listening. Lots of good people. But yeah, if you want to reach out, connect with me, hit me up on LinkedIn, Twitter, etc. And then, if I had one thing to advise is, I started saying it and it sounds like a shtick, but I believe it to be true is if you're coming into the industry, be kind, always be real without hesitation, and entirely every step of the way, be listening and learning. Shut your mouth and keep your ears open. And 90% of the time you'll end up in the right direction.
And be a crab and be open to evolution.
Yes,
right.
You crab. Yeah, the crab episode. No, I mean, absolutely. I mean, I'd say the same thing. I mean, I think, don't be afraid to learn from anybody and anybody that'll tell you, and be nice and curious. I think curiosity makes up for a lot of faults. It's made up for a lot of mine in my career so far, and I think it will for quite a bit. I think all of us here have one thing in common, is that we really want to figure out how things work, and that's probably been a really big thing for all of us. So, Kevin, Aaron, thank you so much for coming on, and I really look forward to running into y'all at some more conferences and seeing you around.
All right. Thank
Have
you
a good
both.
one.
Great to hang with
Absolutely.
you tonight.
Awesome.
Good talking to y'all.